All right. Again, for those who don't know me, I'm Katie Stilp. I'm the local history librarian here at Appleton Public Library. Welcome to our genealogy jumpstart. Today, all about city directories and other types of directories. So hopefully you might have already experienced city directories, but if not, city directories are going to be published listings of the different residents, the different streets, businesses, organizations, or any institutions in a specific area. It will give you, of course, that location or that address in that city. Usually they include some sort of alphabetical listing of all those people who live there. They list the heads of households, similar to the census, like we talked about a couple months ago. You also get their address and occupation. Some also would include a wife's name, usually in parentheses or italics after that husband's name, but usually you don't see that in the directories until after the 1920s. It's also really great that a lot of them feature any working adult in the household. So if there's adult children living there, if the brother of the head of household is living there, or some other boarder or somebody who's renting a room from that family, they would be listed there as well with their details. And sometimes they even list young adults, like a 16-year-old who might be a student or who might be working just as a clerk in a grocery store or something. So you get those little details sometimes of your ancestors, even when they're young adults. They are published regularly. They're usually annually or biannually. You will notice sometimes they do sometimes skip years. So even if you expect to see it every year, depending on the staff of that company that was creating that directory, what budget they had, the population size. Of course, during the wars, they temporarily paused publishing those. So you might not see one every single year. But usually after that mid and 19th century, you're going to be more likely to see them published pretty much every year for the different locations. Of course, they typically cover a specific geographic region, usually those urban areas like a city, or sometimes they even have a whole county included in certain directories. Of course, with those smaller communities, they're too small to publish their own directory, or sometimes they're included in those larger directories like a county directory. So like for us in Appleton, we've got Little Chute, Kaukauna, Kimberly, all those smaller communities around us that are usually featured in our Appleton directories as well, or in those Outagamie County directories. Again, those names, addresses, and occupations are pretty much the most common data you're going to find in the directories, but they're all going to vary place to place, year to year, on what additional details you might find. The publishers are different, of course. City directories nowadays, they don't always include all these details like they did historically. But you might get things like death dates of somebody who died since the last directory, or forwarding addresses for people who moved, and a lot of other little tidbits that you'll see when we look at some examples. They also have really great sections that list the different streets and all the people who live on that street by the different house numbers. So if you're somebody who really wants to see the neighbors that are around your ancestors' neighborhood, or if you want to trace the history of your house and find out who lived in your house before you, you can easily go to that street area and then look at, hey, this is Main Street and my house number is 1234. And then you can see who's in it in, the 1960s and who's in it in the 1920s and keep going back historically. There's also some great extra content, usually in the front or the back of the directory. So you'll see business listings, information on different civic, social, religious, and charitable institutions in that area and the surrounding areas. They sometimes even have really great historic photos or maps of the area in these directories. So it's really helpful to kind of give you some context to that area where your ancestors are living and what is included in that area. So here's an example of a 1945 San Francisco City Directory from Ancestry. So of course here on the side you see the big large page, but I zoomed in so that you can see some details. So sometimes you see, the ditto marks and then the name and then more ditto marks. One thing I wanted to point out, you might see bold names. Those are people that they just paid extra because they wanted you to know who they were, or they were somebody more prominent, or it was a prominent business that they wanted that little bit of advertising. Here you see, the name of the head of household. In parentheses, you see that name of that spouse. You see that occupation, and then that address. You also might notice they've got an H or they've got an R in front of that address. So the H stands for householder or homeowner. That means that that person owns that location. The R stands for renter or roomer. So it's somebody who doesn't own that home. They're just temporarily renting it. This is a very clear distinction I want to make, that city directories are not the same as telephone books. Some people sometimes use those words interchangeably, but they are not the same. Both could be produced at the same time in the same location, but they're both different resources. City directories are going to feature people regardless of if they had a phone or not, and they also go back further than phone books. So, for example, by the 1950s, only about 2/3 of US homes had a telephone. So, if your ancestor wasn't one of those people, they wouldn't be included in that telephone book. Or, of course, before the telephone came into existence, you still wanted to know who was living in a specific area, which is why we have city directories. And just looking at Appleton, we have our earliest city directory that we have is 1873. Well, we didn't get the telephone here in Appleton until 1877. And then we don't even have a phone book until 1950. And then there's actually a gap until 1974. So if you're looking in your ancestors who are, living in this location in the early 1900s, you only have the city directories to rely on. You don't have those telephone books. Also, of course, like I've already pointed out, city directories sometimes typically contain more information than telephone books. A lot of times, telephone books, you're just getting that name, that address, and that phone number for that person. You're not getting details like their spouse or their occupation. So again, just to show you an example, here's a 1959 Green Bay City Directory from Ancestry that shows, again, what a city directory looks like. You get that name of that person, their spouse, their occupation. Sometimes you got to kind of decode it a little bit because they're abbreviated to save, room. And then sometimes you even get what company. So I can tell he's a machine operator at Fort Howard Paper, and this is where they live. In comparison, here is a telephone book from around the same time period, 1954. This is Chicago, so a bigger city, but here's a telephone directory. So again, you're seeing the names, you're seeing an address. Because it's Chicago, they're listing, of course, those little suburb areas where they might be living. And then you've got their phone number. I have no clue what they did for occupations. I would need to consult a city directory. I have no clue who their spouses are. I would need to consult that city directory or other resources to get that information. So you can see that difference between the two. You might be wondering, well, why should I use city directories? Of course, first off, they put your ancestor in a specific time, specific place. The census, like we talked about a couple months ago, obviously is only every 10 years. So there's a big gap between those 10 years. And remember that 1890 census was pretty much completely destroyed by fire. Well, we can still use the city directories to kind of fill in the gaps of that time period, fill in those census year time periods where I want to see, are my ancestors still living in this specific city during that 10-year gap of time, or are they moving around? Even if they're moving around within the city, now you know the different addresses they lived in. It also helps know where they are or where they're not to help you locate those other records that they might be featured in. So, seeing them in a city directory might help you narrow down an immigration time period for that ancestor who arrived here that, hey, all of a sudden you find them in the city directories in this location that you know that they settled in, whereas a couple years prior they weren't there and you can't find them anywhere else. That might be because that's the time period that they weren't living in the country yet. Can also help narrow down a death date or a marriage date for your ancestors. You can find out when they moved or moved back to a specific location, again, helping you locate those records in the different areas that they lived in and knowing what geographic location to search in for those specific time periods. They also give you more context on your ancestors, and then that context can lead you to potential other resources to confirm what you have on your ancestors and confirm you have the right person. Like we were just talking briefly before we started that, sometimes people, the same name, they think, oh, that's got to be my ancestor. Well, you can use all these context clues to, take that John Smith away from that John Smith and figure out which one's the right one that you're looking for. So you could find something like where they lived in that city directory and then follow up with land records if they owned the land. Um, and figure out again, did they rent or did they own that location where they were living? Again, you can figure out their occupation or where they work. So you can follow up to learn more about that business, or maybe there's potential records at archives that you can find. Hey, I want to learn more about that Fort Howard Paper Company. Now I can go search and see if there's anything in the directories and anything in the archives for that business. You can see who else might be living in that house, if there's different relatives who are living there at specific times or different borders. Of course, no relationships are going to be listed in that city directory. But of course, you see somebody who's living in that same house with the same name, they're probably going to be related somehow, I would assume. You don't want to always assume that it's going to be a parent-child relationship, but you can at least use this to locate that name and then try to explore further to see what kind of relationship they might have had. Again, context clues, using those same name people, using that information from the directory when you're even evaluating other records that you've found. Maybe you need that address, and if it's not an address where you know your ancestor lived, then is it the correct person that you're looking for, or is it somebody with the same name? Even when you're searching in the census, if you can't find an ancestor in a specific census, try looking at the directory to find their specific address and then use that address to try to find them in the census where they're supposed to be. This works really well with the different cities, the larger cities. Rural addresses, of course, are going to be much harder because sometimes they don't always have an exact address. It just might be rural route 2, and you don't get any more detail than that in the directories. Again, they could give you clues on when an ancestor died, even if you don't have a date. So they're here one year, then not the next. They could have moved, they could have died. Or you might see the wife listed as a widow. Unfortunately, sometimes not always by her first name. But be aware, sometimes they even list females as a widow, even if they were divorced. So that at least gives you a clue that there's some sort of change in that relationship between that couple. And you can use that little clue to try to find a little bit more about that couple. A directory might also be a source where you list an ancestor if he or she was not registered to vote and did not own property. So, if they're not going to be featured in any of those other resources because they rented a property, they're still going to be featured in that city directory. So again, it's one more piece of the puzzle that can help give you those clues for your ancestor. It's also cool that you can even use the address of your ancestor to see if the home is still standing. You can research the history of that house, learn more about other people who lived there before and after your ancestor. And even if you can't, go to that specific location, you can use resources like Google Earth or Google Maps Street View to look at the current view of the house and that neighborhood. So I'll just show you an example here. So here I'm going to pop in an address of 451 Bartlett Street in San Francisco, where I know my grandma and my great-grandparents lived. So I can just really zoom in on this location where they lived. I can see their neighborhood really well. If I want to, I can use this little guy and put it down on the street and then look at the street view. So now I can see, oh, here's the exterior of the home and what it looked like. I can see what the neighbor's house looked like and kind of zoom all around. And also, as you can see here, you can see there's different historical imagery. So sometimes you can see other dates. So if you click on that see other dates, I can see what the house looked like in different years. Sometimes they only go back, 10, 12, 15 years, sometimes more historic, but I can see, did the color of the house change? Oh, it sure did. Now I can see a view of what it looked like in 2007. Maybe that's a time period when your ancestors lived there, but maybe not. And again, you can kind of zoom all around and see what else is around this location. Sometimes you can even get interior photos if that house was recently sold. So what I usually do is I just go to Google and then I type in that address of that street. And you find it like on Zillow. Like here's a Zillow listing. It's showing an interior view of what this house looks like. So I can see, oh my gosh, this is what the kitchen looked like. This is what the bathroom looked like. And hey, I've got a picture of my great grandparents and they're standing in front of this kitchen. Now I can kind of put it in that context of, hey, things didn't really change a whole lot from the time that they lived there to what it looked like a few years ago when they tried to sell it. Beware, of course, though, street names and numbers might have changed. There's a site I have linked in your handout from Steve Morse where you can find some of those common address and street names changing, or of course, call your local library. They should know if there's any change. For example, like us in Appleton, I know 1925, that's when we changed a lot of street names and street numbers here. So we always refer to that 1925 directory when talking about the pre-1925 address and what the address is today. Of course, the house also could have been replaced or moved. That was more common than you think it was. So just because it's still standing today doesn't mean it's exactly that same house that was there in 1930 when your ancestors lived there. Again, you can learn more about what was in the area your ancestors lived, explore more records, give more context about their different lives, finding out who their neighbors were. Maybe that list on their marriage record is giving a witness name, and now you can look that person up in the directory to see who they are. Or look up the minister who married them. What church is that person affiliated with? And then that gives you an option to then look in the church records for more information. You're going to see those listings of different businesses, schools, churches, clubs, all that stuff. Try to narrow down what school did your ancestor attend, what church. Using that city directory, using that map, see what's closest to them and try to put it in context for that time period of where they're living. You get the names of the newspapers, the different cemeteries that are in existence during a specific year as well. Just quickly, I want to run into a little bit of history of city directories, just so you understand, how far back they go. So the first U.S. city directories were issued in Philadelphia in 1785. It was actually by two different competing companies, and then many of the other bigger cities soon followed. Originally, they just designed it for businessmen to find different customers. So those early ones sometimes are only listing people who own property or people who are employed, which unfortunately excludes most women, or those socially prominent people, because of course they're trying to use it to find customers. They want to go for the customers who they think will spend money on whatever they're selling. But then the later directories are going to list those heads of households with the spouses and adult children. By the mid-19th century, all major cities had city directories, and those rural communities or nearby cities sometimes were covered in those larger city directories or in directories that are by region, so county, for example. Unfortunately, some cities still do not publish city directories because it's very costly to compile all that data, print all that. Some might only publish on occasion, or they might consolidate with other communities. Us in Appleton, we have what's called a Fox Cities directory, which is still published yearly, but it includes a lot of other larger cities around our area. And then the phone book. So that first phone book was dated on February 21st, 1878, shortly after Alexander Graham Bell made his first successful phone call. It featured just 50 business subscribers, no addresses, no phone numbers for the New Haven, Connecticut telephone exchange. But as the phone service increased, phone books began to look more like what we are used to seeing today. Of course, though, phone books are printed less and less as the shift to digital stuff continues. It's, pretty easy to just Google search a telephone number, and a lot of people just don't have landlines anymore, of course. So why would we print phone books? For those current generations, though, there's a website called White Pages, or the library also has something called A to Z databases that you can use free with your library card. If you go to apl.org and look at our e-library listings, it's under there. It'll give you an address and a phone number if they still have a landline. Of course, again, not many people do, but if they still do, it will be listed there. You could also do a reverse address search. So if you have an address of a location, you can search that address and see who lives there now. Now we're going to dive into the different types of directories because there's more than just those city and county directories. But again, this is kind of the main one that us genealogists focus on, listing those residents of a particular location. But don't let that name fool you. Again, those smaller towns, rural areas, in some cases are featured in there or could be in that county directory. By that mid-19th century time period, they often also included those supplemental local information like things about their government, different street guides, a listing of all those churches, clubs, organizations, different categorized lists of all the businesses in that city. Again, they might have that alphabetic listing and that street listing in that directory, which will help you trace the history of that location. They don't just exist for the United States. Many international countries also have them as well. For example, the earliest I found was London, 1595. So even if your ancestors have been in America for a long time, you might get lucky and find an existing international one as well. They're also a little easier to use because they're typeface. They're not handwritten records like some of our other genealogy record types we use. So if you have a lot of difficulty reading what that occupation is in the census, look them up in the city directory and see, because it's typed, you might be able to easily decipher it then. Typically, they've got a specific order in the directories, like we saw in the examples a few minutes ago. It's usually that name of that person, followed by their occupation, followed by their address. Sometimes they interchange that address and occupation, though, where it might be name, address, occupation. But a lot of them that I've seen have been name, occupation, address. Now I'll show you quickly just how to find them on Ancestry Library Edition. So again, Ancestry Library Edition, completely free to use from home. Of course, Ancestry, the paid edition, does also have city directories. But to get to the library edition, if you're an Appleton Library card holder, go to apl.org, click on eLibrary, and it's going to be one of these first ones, Ancestry Library Edition. So there's a couple different ways we can get to the city directories. First, I think the easiest is by scrolling all the way down to these quick links area, and you can see city directories is right there. So you can go very easily into the city directories. It even shows you the different directories that they have by location and by date time period. So you can see right there what kind of collections this version has. Then you can pop in your ancestor's name, who you're looking for. If you want to put in a birth location or just a location of maybe where they lived, and then click search. And now I can see some of the results here. So if I hover over it, it's going to give me a little kind of snapshot. If I see the little view button, I can see there's an image attached with this. So I can click into it to be brought into that directory right here. And now I can zoom in and see he's boarding at the specific location in Appleton. If I want to, I can even save a copy of this. I can save it right here to my computer. And, if I'm in the library using a library device, I can save it to a USB drive or email it to myself to save it. Once you're in here also, like if I want to go to a different year in Appleton, what I can do is I can click on this year, and then I can see all the different year options for Appleton. If next one I want to go to is 1915, and then I can pull it up and go page by page, or I can say, oh, let me see if the H's are around page 100. Nope, I'm still at the D, so I got to go a little bit more and kind of hunt and peck a little bit, and kind of similar to how you would look at a physical book. You're kind of, looking for that same person that you're trying to find in that directory. That's just another way if you don't want to keep having to go through the search to try to find them. And of course, the different name spellings sometimes throughout the years makes it sometimes tricky to find ancestors if their name is spelled creatively. Another way to find these is by going to search and by going to card catalog. So you can come in here and you can see there's a directories and members list area. I can sort this by the record count, which is going to give me, the largest different collection. So I can see there's one specifically for the United States city directories. And then I can even start browsing this collection if I didn't want to put in a name. If I really just want to look at a specific location, I can click on that state, click on that county or that city that it's going to be, having, and then click on the specific year that I want. And then now I can be brought into it. And then again, I can go page by page, or I can start hunting and pecking around whatever kind of number I want to put in there based on where I think my ancestor would be alphabetically. Any questions about using Ancestry Library Edition to find those directories? What about our virtual folks? Any virtual folks have any questions here? Is the year on the cover of the directory the year it was published or the year the info was gathered? So I'm going to get to that. Usually they compiled the information about a year before they published it. So if it says 1871, that means the information is likely from 1870-ish. Sometimes in here they do say sometimes like when it was compiled, if you look at kind of some of this early stuff, sometimes they list a little bit about where they got the data from or when they collected the data, but not all of them are as detailed. It really depends on the publisher. A couple pages back.
Right there, containing names.
Yeah, so right here. December 12th, 1871 is when this one was compiled, it looks like. So there's your answer. Sometimes they say that, sometimes they don't, though. Does Brown County Library have Ancestry at home for patrons? No library has Ancestry at home for patrons. It is library use only, unless you want to pay for a personal subscription to Ancestry. Do you think city directories will come back into popularity with a predominance of cell phones? That's a great question. I have nothing to do with city directories and publishing them. I'm assuming it just costs so much to have the information compiled, the information printed. So I would be surprised if they come back into prominence. It's also just so easy to find stuff online. Were there directories for farms and rural? So sometimes they're going to be included in those county directories. They do also have some farm directories, but it's really kind of few and far between depending on the specific locations, specific time periods. All right. Our next type of directory is going to be that street address directory. They also might be called a crisscross directory or a house directory. Very similar to those city directories, but it's going to be only specifically arranged by street and by house number instead of alphabetical by surname. So it's going to give you that picture of each individual household, seeing who is living in that house, who's living near each other, who the neighbors are, a little bit more easy that you can see that street at a glance. They're a little bit more limited than city directories. They're not always published as regularly. Mostly those larger cities, towns had them, or they may be within a city directory, usually towards the front or towards the back of that city directory. Again, it's going to vary year to year, the different publishers, different locations. And again, it's a great tool if you're researching the history of your house. So here's an example of one from California from 1944 that I found on Internet Archive. So this is another great resource that you can sometimes find some of these old directories. So if we zoom in here, we can see Here's Maple Ave, and then I can see Maple Ave, I can see 3000, 3001, 3007, and see who's listed here. This one's just giving a phone number for those people, but then, I can use this detail to then maybe go to the directory, city directory, and find more detail, like what their occupation is, or other details. And again, kind of using this to research the history of the house, who the different neighbors are in this neighborhood as well. There's going to be, of course, business only directories that only list those businesses. You again might still find a business directory within a city directory, but they also might have printed a separate one. So if you're familiar with the term yellow pages, where they used to print a specific just business only kind of telephone book for those listings, that's similar to what these business directories would have looked like. They're usually going to be organized in alphabetical order. Sometimes they may also be listed by business type. So all the jewelry manufacturers, all the auto dealers are all listed in a specific section, for example. Again, not available for all the locations, all the time periods. It really just depends on the specific communities. And they may not be all inclusive. Sometimes all the companies didn't participate, or sometimes maybe the publisher required a fee in order to be featured in this business directory that people would have had to pay to be included. Here's an example. This is just a part of one of our county directories here in Appleton that I got on Ancestry. So you can see here's the creameries, here's the crockery and glassware, here's the dairyman, the dentist, the dressmaking shops. And then alphabetically within those different categories is going to be all the listings of the people or their business names and those addresses. So again, an easy way to kind of see maybe who your ancestors' competition was at that time period. Is there a lot of dentists in 1901 in this time period? Or, gosh, my ancestor was the only dairyman at this time in this community. That's pretty cool. So little details that you can find through the directories. They've also got some cool little advertisements for different businesses that you can see kind of at the top and at the bottom of each of the pages. So maybe if your ancestor owned a business, they might have had a little ad in one of the directory pages as well. You can also sometimes find they've got different indexes, especially for those larger communities. Like this one's an example of Nashville in 1860 that I found on Internet Archive. You can see it's listing all the different schools on page 81, state library information on 89, city hospital information on 46. So now I know kind of where in the directory to go to get to those specific pages, for example. So I always try to check towards the beginning or towards the end to see if there's some sort of index for a directory. There's also going to be different trade and professional directories. So very similar to a business directory, but it's only going to cover a specific category of business. So it might cover the whole county, the whole state, the whole country, listing those prominent professions and tradespeople like railway workers or doctors or lawyers. Somebody asked a few minutes ago about farm directories. Those were popular in the 20th century. So this is, a specific trade that it's only going to have those farmers in those specific locations. Here's an example of one of those farm directories from Boone County, Indiana in 1920. I found it on Internet Archive, and right here towards the beginning, it kind of gives me a little index of what the different abbreviations mean and how they lay out each specific listing for people. So you can see it's the name, in parentheses, the spouse's name, then they've even got the children's name. They've got the farm name. They've got the specific post office that that farm would have been serviced by, the specific township information, how many acres that they had, if they were a tenant or not, the owner who owned that specific location, and then the name of the telephone, that if they would have had a telephone at that time. So you can see, again, they've kind of decoded it down here for you so that you can then find your ancestor and the rest of it and then kind of decode it that way. There's also things like these medical directories. I found this one for Ireland. So again, there are international ones available online. Found this one on Ancestry Library Edition. It's for 1860. And it basically just lists the name of that person, a little bit more detail, like where they got their degrees, or maybe where else they worked. So you can see all the different locations. And now I can go follow up with additional, records that I might be able to find on this person in these specific time periods. Of course, they've got those telephone directories, so alphabetical listings by name with their address and phone number. But of course, for your ancestor to appear in those, they had to have a telephone. Most cities, again, sometimes had a city directory and a telephone directory for a specific period of time until that phone service became more common. Some places, those phone directories would have replaced those city directories, especially around that mid 20th century. Or some places might still print both or might have just a city directory. Again, it really depends on each individual community, but as we know now, many don't print those telephone directories anymore, given that most people have cell phones now. So again, here's another example of a telephone directory. This is from 1950. This is only available in the library, so I couldn't find any specific Appleton telephone directory. So this points to the fact that not everything's online. You're going to have to sometimes go to a library or somewhere that's going to have copies of the directories to be able to look in sometimes to find your ancestor. But again, they're going to list that name of that person, their address, and then their phone number at this time period in an alphabetical listing. There's a lot of other different types of directories. So you might get alumni directories, like this example here, 1919 Harvard Alumni Directory that I found on Internet Archive, listing the different people who attended and what their degrees were and what their addresses were at the time of that directory. There's different church directories of all the different members. They've got yearbooks, which are kind of considered a directory, showing who went to that school at that specific time period. And then so many more other different, various smaller types of directories, again, depending on the community, depending on time periods and what's going to be available. And again, some of that stuff is going to be offline, so don't always just rely on what's online. Do we have any questions before we dive a little deeper into some examples and showing some stuff? Online folks here. What ancestry are you accessing for Appleton Library patrons from home? There is no access from home through the library. You'd have to have a paid Ancestry subscription. I'm presenting live in the library, so I can use Ancestry Library Edition in the library. All right. So we saw a few examples so far, but you might be wondering, what information can I find? Well, again, it's going to vary depending on the time, place, type of directory. Usually you're going to find that person's name, address, occupation, though not in the newer directories, their employer or their employee address. Sometimes their marital status, or you can maybe infer that information by seeing that parenthesis name, that you can infer that that's their spouse. But of course, don't just take that as confirmation that they were married. You want to confirm that with other records. Again, you might also discover if they owned or rented that residence. You'll find lots of fun little miscellaneous abbreviations like boards, rooms, widow, student, even different abbreviations for first names. So keep that in mind when you're searching in some of these sites. Maybe not spelling out Charles because it might be abbreviated in a specific directory. So they're trying to save a little bit of room with those listings. There's also different abbreviations for those occupations. Again, they're going to all vary depending on the specific directory. Sometimes you can kind of make it out. Sometimes they're a little harder to decipher. Also, if you look at the front of the directory, sometimes they kind of have a little key to some of those common abbreviations. And I've also got some links in your handout for you, some more common abbreviations that you might locate in these directories. The information from the directory was likely collected up to a year prior to the date that you're going to see. So for example, like I mentioned earlier, the 1905 directory, that information might have been collected in 1904, kind of towards the end of that year, possibly. Kind of depends on when they're printing it and what each publisher was doing. And again, like we saw in that example, sometimes the directories are actually giving you information on how it was collected, when it was collected. Just like the census, that information is being gathered by different collectors. They're going door to door to ask each of those people for information to get included in their directory. Later on, of course, they started mailing cards, asking if people had any updates for their next edition. But just like the census, we really don't know who's providing this information. Is it the male head of the household? Is it the female head of the household? Is it the adult child living in that household? We have no clue on who's giving this information. Directories also were kind of more geared towards libraries and businesses and Chamber of Commerce and all those kind of business people because it's really not cheap for you to buy one. Some like are hundreds of dollars. So imagine, could your ancestor really afford one of these? Probably not. You can even sometimes see the price on some of the first pages sometimes. Like for example, I looked up the Appleton 1915 city directory was $5. Well, we think $5, that's, not a lot. But in today's dollars, accounting for inflation, that equals $156. So think about it. Is your ancestor going to pay $156 to have a directory? No. But a library might, or a business might, if they're, wanting to look for different business contacts. And of course, those larger cities are charging a lot more than just those $5. So it's maybe several hundreds of dollars in today's money. They also, just like magazines, would have some sort of subscription basis. Again, a lot of these sometimes for those larger cities might be hundreds of pages or even thousands of pages. So it's not cheap to print them at all. That's also why sometimes it might be difficult to locate these because there might be just so few in existence yet. That only, select libraries have certain years because we've gotten them donated from people who happen to have had them, passed down from generation to generation, or they collected them at certain times. Just like any other genealogy source you find, you do want to verify that information that you find within these directories because again, like I just mentioned a minute ago, we don't know who's providing this information. So we always want to come up with multiple sources for each fact that we're finding. A couple helpful tips for you. So when I start searching for my ancestors in the directory, I start with their last known year that they should have been in there before they died, and then I work backward in time because remember, street names were renumbered and renamed sometimes. So it might make it appear like your ancestor moved when in reality they didn't. So again, like I know 1925 is that magical year in Appleton. It's going to be a different year in your community, or maybe your community didn't have that happen. May not have even changed when your ancestor lived there. So you might not realize your ancestor's address from 1920 is different than the address here in 2025. And again, if your ancestors are people who are renting, it's possible that they move to another address, maybe on that same street or that same neighborhood every year or two. So keep that in mind when you're looking year to year, that it looks like they're moving and why are they moving or why is that number changing? It might be because they're renting and they wanted cheaper rent or they needed a bigger place or a smaller place or they wanted to live closer to their workplace or closer to a specific family member. Just like how we would move today, they wanted to do things like that too. Some early directories might not always give you an exact address. So we can see in this example of the 1887 to 88 directory of Appleton that I found online, you can see something like this. They reside at ES Union 1S of Washington. Well, that kind of translates to the east side of Union Street, one house south of Washington Street. So you basically need to look at a map from this time period. We've got a Sanborn insurance map, for example, of the community to kind of determine where this house was. But then you might see other examples like the Stilt Brothers cigar manufacturers that has a specific address of where they had that business. So usually you'll see businesses list a specific address, houses not always. On the Library of Congress's website, they have a lot of great Sanborn insurance maps. These were originally created to determine how much insurance to charge our ancestors, but now we as genealogists can use them to look at the specific community. So what I usually do is I first narrow down by a specific location. So if I know I'm looking for a specific state, I'm going to find Wisconsin here. Oh, I got to verify that I'm human here. And then I can narrow down to a specific county. And then I can even narrow down by a specific city as well. So if I'm going down to Appleton here, this directory that we looked at was the 1887-88 one. So I'm going to try to find a Sanborn map from around that time period. So here's an 1886 one, or the next one is 1891. So I'm probably going to look at this 1886 one and see if I can find this specific street. If I pull this up, usually the first page of the Sanborn insurance map is going to give you a little index. So I can look in here and I can look for Union Street. So I'm going to look for Union Street. I can see it's on page number 9. Or there's also sometimes a little map down here where if you can look here, so I can see where page 9 is, and I can zoom in and see, all right, what kind of, is it the intersection that I'm looking for example? And then now I know to go to that page, pull it up here, and then I can zoom in again. So here's Union Street, and then what was the cross street? Washington. So here's Union and Washington. And now I got to do my north, east, south, west, and then I can figure out exactly what house they're talking about. So we've got the east side of Union Street, one house south of Washington. So east side, one house south of Washington. So here we are. And then if I zoom in, they've got a little handwritten address here that I would get a more specific address then for that location, even if the city directory doesn't give me a more specific address. Again, we've got a lot of great ones digitized here on the Library of Congress, but this isn't all that there is. Your local libraries might also have hard copies of these Sanborn insurance maps or additional years that the Library of Congress has not yet digitized on their website. But this is nice that you can zoom in really far and look at some of the detail. If you see that business name in bold or in all capital letters or that name of that person, that's just because it's somebody who decided to pay a fee to have their name stand out from those other listings. So we see August Smith was like, hey, I'm an important person. I want my name to stand out from the other Smiths. So did Charles Smith. So you can see those examples there that they decided to have those names stand out as, a marketing strategy. Don't ignore the table of contents. So I always check usually towards the beginning of that directory. You could be missing some valuable information if you don't see that. Sometimes they have late additions or people who moved. They call them the removal section. So it was too late to kind of put it within the right spot in the directory because they'd already printed it or typeset it a little bit. So they just threw in that extra page with those late additions or the people who moved and gave some information about who was added or who left, sometimes where they came from, sometimes where they went, or who might have died all of a sudden between getting the information and publishing the information. So always be sure to double check that. Here's an example here. This is the Alterations, additions, etc., received too late for regular insertion. This is from the 1945 San Francisco City Directory that I found on Ancestry. So if one of these people is my ancestor or the person I'm looking for, if I look in the regular part of the directory and I don't see them, well, it's because they are only featured in this little section because it was too late for them to have added them in the regular part. So that's why you always want to double check all the parts. What I always do after I find my ancestor's address in those alphabetical listings, I go to that street code part that we looked at earlier where it lists the streets and the different houses. I see who else might have been living there that didn't have the same last name. Maybe they're a relative, or I see who else is living in their neighborhood to see if there are any other people that I might recognize that same name, or maybe it's the maiden name of the wife of the house and the parents are living on that same street, for example. I pull up a map of that area, the street guide, I look at all the neighboring streets, see who the possible relatives are nearby, where's the closest school, where's the closest church. So something like that Sanborn insurance map that we just looked at can help determine, where a nearby school is or where a nearby church is. If you find a widow listed at an address, and the next year she's not listed at that address, but there's a man's name listed, put two and two together sometimes, check the marriage records. She might have remarried, and that's now her second husband's name, for example. So don't just assume, oh, she must have moved somewhere else. She might have remarried. And again, sometimes they're even listed as a widow when they divorced because that man was dead to them at that point. You could also locate advertisements for a business for your ancestor that they would have owned or perhaps worked for. Like we saw in a couple examples, some directories have a lot of ads, the tops, the bottoms, or various pages kind of in the beginning or at the end, you'll see lots of ads. Even if they didn't own or work for a specific business, you can even see just what's in the community and what would have been available to them. You can use some of that supplemental information to see what social clubs or civic clubs there were, or did they have a theater that they could go see the movie, or a dance hall, that you heard your grandparents would always go to this dance hall. Well, now you know the name of the dance hall and where it was located. Or are there records for a specific club or organization they were a part of? If you have an ancestor who lived in a rural part of the area, they might give acreage that they owned and sometimes even the property value of that acreage or that residence. If you aren't sure of a specific directory and if it exists for a specific time and location, the best place to check is your local library in that area. I always go to Google or whatever search engine you want to see what local libraries are in a specific area. And then also check those nearby cities, nearby towns that may be included in those bigger city directories because, again, those smaller communities aren't always going to have their own directory. So, for example, I could search something like libraries near Orlando, Florida. And now I can see, oh, there's an Orlando Public Library, there's a Southeast branch, there's a South Trail branch, and I can see all the different areas here. I can click on it, and then here's a website for them, or I can give them a call right here. I can see their address and find out, do they have city directories? What years do they have? Does it include the specific community near Orlando that I'm looking for my ancestors in? And get some more information. Or maybe I'm planning a research trip down here and I want to learn in advance what they might have. I can go ahead and give them a call or take a look at their website right there. It's also really helpful, not all the libraries are going to be the city plus public library. I mean, Appleton Public Library, we're in Appleton, but, Brown County Library, that's Green Bay. But because it's a county library, they have different branches all throughout the county. You're not going to find just Green Bay Public Library. So that helps you when they are named after, certain things or certain people to know what locations there are. If there are many branches, I always check with the main branch, the downtown branch, the central branch. That's usually tends to be the largest of the branches. Those are usually the ones that are going to be the holders of those historic materials, like city directories. Again, look at their website, see if they have a local history section or a genealogy section on their website that might give you a listing of what years they have or other resources they might have for your local history and genealogy research. All right, directories might also still be on microfilm, or they might be in book-bound form yet. They might not always be digitized. Don't forget those regional libraries, those state libraries, university libraries, they also have directories. They might have different directories, or there might be a little overlap in what they have versus what a public library would have. But again, you want to check all these different resources. There's also really large genealogy libraries. So Library of Congress has the largest city directory collection. The Family History Library in Salt Lake City, Newberry Library in Chicago, they have a lot of US and international collections, as well as the Fort Wayne, Indiana one, the Genealogy Center. They have Allen County Public Library is the official name of that system, but they've got the Genealogy Center. It is the second largest collection after Salt Lake City for resources. So if you're kind of in the Midwest like we are in Appleton, that's a great resource to check for what directories they have. Of course, you might not live near that library where you're trying to find those directories. Sometimes if you give them a call, they might do a few lookups for you for free, or maybe they'll say, yeah, we can do it, but hey, we need a donation, or it's always just nice to donate money to the libraries because we always need money. But if you need some more extensive research, like, hey, I need you to check 20 directories, that's a little bit more outside of the scope of what we can do. We can only devote so much time to researching for people. But maybe you can plan a research trip there or try and locate a volunteer who might live in that community or a paid researcher that you could hire for an hour or two to go look in those resources for you. Check always with the local genealogy society if there is one. If they don't personally do it or have somebody who do it, they might be able to refer you to somebody who would help you do it. There's also lots of really great Facebook genealogy groups that sometimes you can find people in those communities, or maybe somebody who's going to the Library of Congress or the Family History Library who offers to do a few lookups for people as well. Again, check archives, check museums. We've got, locally, we've got UW Green Bay. They have a great area research center in Green Bay that has a lot of local collections. The Appleton History Museum right here in Appleton, just a few doors down from the library, has a great collection of city directories. Some of the years that we have, including maybe some of the years we don't have here at the library, or maybe their copy's better than the copy we've got. Check historical societies and genealogy societies. So we've got, for example, the Wisconsin Historical Society in Madison has lots of great directories from all around the state and even surrounding states. Or something like the Ohio Genealogical Society Library. They've got, great resources for that area as well. So again, kind of think outside the box of more than just local. Maybe those locations are closer to you than having to go to that local community to search for it. Some institutions do charge for research, even if you're conducting it yourself. Some places say, hey, it's $20 to research here, or they have to charge you an hourly fee or something if they're doing research for you. So always be sure to research that specific institution, what their policies are, what their requirements are for doing research there. The Library of Congress also has a great interactive map from 1861 to 1960 that shows you what their holdings are for city directories. So if you're like, hey, do city directories even exist for this specific community, like Stevens Point? Do they have directories? Well, it looks like there's 5 directories that the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. would have. It's not saying that there's just 5 total in existence. It's just saying what the Library of Congress has. Maybe the libraries in Stevens Point have a lot more than just 5 directories, but this is giving you an idea. Maybe if you live closer to Washington, D.C., or you're planning a trip there, you can see what directories they might have. So again, it says it's a large self-serve collection. It is on microfilm. It is not physical book form. So again, you're not always going to get those physical book forms. And it says, hey, we don't interlibrary loan this. Our staff can't search these directories for you. You can hire a researcher or come look at the directories yourself. Here's some researchers that you can hire in Washington, D.C. to perform it for a fee if you are interested in that, or if that's one of your only options for research. That gives you some more detail on, and that link is included in your handout. Thankfully, though, a good amount of directories are going to be digitized. Of course, again, not all of them, but we've got a lot of great genealogy websites that have directories. There is unfortunately not one magical website that has them all. All of them have different collections. So not everything's online, not every year is online. Those libraries, those genealogy and historical societies, they might have digitized some of them and they might host them through their website. So for example, we've got the UW Digital Collections. We have a specific Appleton collection that's hosted on this website. So if you go to our e-library and narrow down to genealogy, you can get down to this University of Wisconsin Digital Collections. And this is our Appleton Public Library collection within this resource, where you can see we've got some directories here. So you can see city directory. And now I can look at this one or search within it and then go page by page, or I can search a specific name in here and see, oh, look it, they're on page 147. So now I can dive into that and I can save it right here. So this is, just a resource that we happen to have here in this location. Other libraries, depending on their location, are going to have, similar resources, or maybe they haven't digitized anything. There might also be statewide resources. So there's a great site here in Wisconsin called Recollection Wisconsin that has a lot of really great city directories digitized on here. So if you've got Wisconsin ancestors, I definitely encourage you to pop in here and I just type in city directory here. Oh, well, that's weird that it's an error. Maybe they're having some difficulty with their site today. Let's see. See if I go in this way instead of searching for some reason. So we've got some other things like maps here. Here's some directories. So usually that search field works, but they might be just having an issue with their website right now. But you can see some of the different collections they have here. And sometimes it again links you out to the UW Digital Collections or something else, but we've got different directories in here that I can, click on, search within, or if I just want to browse page by page, I can do that right here and look at it just like I would look at it in the library. So again, that's a great statewide resource if you have Wisconsin ancestors. Like we looked at a little earlier, we've got Ancestry Library Edition, or if you have a paid subscription for Ancestry, you're able to use that from home. The Library Edition you can only use within the library. They do have the largest U.S. collection of city directories that range from 1822 to 1995. They've got something for every state, except for some reason, Alaska, they don't have any at this point, which really surprised me, unless they've added it since I've updated this presentation, but as far as I know, they haven't. They do also have some international collections, so they've got over 1,300 collections, UK, Canada, Poland, Germany, Ireland, Australia, etc. So again, explore those international ones. I usually go through that card catalog to find some of those international collections. Also be aware, sometimes it's actually a county directory, but it might be listed under a city. So for example, when we were looking at the Appleton listings before, a 1910 Appleton directory came up, but it was actually an Outagamie County directory. So it had more than just Appleton in it. It had some of those other communities in our county in it. Usually you can tell by the first few pages what specific location it covers. Looking at those indexes or that table of contents will also help you determine what it covers. Heritage Quest is also a really great resource for you. It looks very similar to Ancestry Library Edition because they own Heritage Quest. but it is free for you to use from home if you live in Wisconsin, or for those people not in Wisconsin, check with your local library. They've got a similar size of collection to Ancestry Library Edition, but theirs is a little smaller, so 1821 to 1989. You can also search for international ones on here. So quickly, I'll show you how to do that. So to get there, you can go through our e-library again. I can narrow down to genealogy and go to Heritage Quest. And again, I can access this from home if I live in Wisconsin. So I can either do a name search right here, or it's really helpful right here where it says search city directories. They've got it broken out right here for you. So I can then go ahead and search that name of that ancestor I'm looking for in that location that they live in. And you'll see it looks pretty much exactly the same as how it looked when we looked at Ancestry Library Edition. And again, you've got those images that you can click on it and be brought into that specific book. And then they even helpfully highlight that name where they found it. And then you can see it right there. And again, save it to your computer, just like you would on Ancestry Library Edition. And again, I can also go in, click on the individual years, or hey, maybe I want cities other than Appleton. I can go see what else they've got, or states other than Wisconsin. I can go click and see what they have. They still do not have Alaska. So for some weird reason. You can also search for some international ones here. So to do that, click on search. If you scroll down, there's search records in other locations. So for example, maybe I'm looking for some European ones. I can click on European, and then I can kind of look through here to see if any of these are directories. Or what I like to do, if you have a Windows computer, you can do Control and F on your keyboard. It pops up this little like search bar, and then I can type in directory, and it'll look for that specific phrase or word on the screen. And now I can see, oh, there's one for this area in Bavaria, Germany. Or I can click the arrow and be brought to the next one. Oh, here's a Switzerland one for a specific collection. And those are just the two that they happen to have for Europe on here. And then again, I can kind of dive into this collection. If there's a search option, I can search it. Otherwise, you're going to have to look through here, and you're going to maybe have to learn an international language in order to decipher this stuff. But, oh, they've got a cool map in this one. And you can see all this great stuff that they've got in here for this international collection. Any questions on using Heritage Quest? Let's see. Yeah, somebody shared Ancestor Hunt. That's one of the other resources I'm going to share in just a minute. Let's see, if I have a subscription to Ancestry, can I gain access to Heritage Quest, or is that separate? It is a separate subscription. It's usually something that's offered through local libraries. So even if you don't live in Wisconsin, check with your local library. They might have free access and for you to use it from home. See, I've seen my father listed as student R with his parents in 1931, but his younger sisters are not listed. Why? He would have been 17 and the sisters 3 to 5 years younger. Usually they didn't list those younger kids, only those older ones that would have been like 16, 17. Because otherwise, think about those families that had like 10 kids. That would be taking up a lot of room in the directories. So it's usually not until they're like at that 16, 17 age where they might still be in school or they might be working at that point that they're listing that specific occupation for those older kids. All right, what else we got here? Family Search has some great resources as well. So it's a completely free site. You do want to have a free account and be signed in. So there's kind of 3 different areas where you can search. Search in the catalog by place, look under directories, search in their digitized book area, and search by record name and type. They've got a really great large collection of US city and business directories ranging from 1749 to about 1990. They've also got a couple international ones as well, and I'll show you how to get there. So this is just familysearch.org. Again, you want to sign up for an account if you don't have one, or sign in if you already have an existing account. So to get there, first, what I can do is I can go to search. No, thanks, I don't want to do your survey. Go to catalog, and I can search by a specific location. So I can do Chicago, for example. And then I can see they've got directories. So now I can see all these various directories. These are going to show you both print ones that they would have at the Family Search Library or in Family Search Centers, as well as online ones. If you are somebody who I just want to look at the online ones, be sure to toggle onto this little online button and then click your search so that it will only show you those online ones that you can look at right now. So you see that directories went from 44 to then 28. There's only 28 that I can look at online, but now I can see, oh, here's some city directories. They've got one, for these specific years, and I can go ahead and look at the images for these, or there's ones that have the magnifying glass. That means there's some sort of index that I can search for a specific name. Otherwise, these ones that just have the images, I can look page by page, and I can, just click on them and see, where they are. So this is looking like a street guide at this point, and I can go page by page until I find what I'm looking for and then save it. Sometimes, I also like to just guess, like, okay, if I'm looking for the K's, maybe I'll put in 500 and see how close I am to the K's. Well, I'm at the W, so maybe I'll go to 250 and see how close am I to the K's. Well, I'm in the I's, so I'm getting pretty close, and then kind of adjust that depending on what way you need to go, either going up or going down until you get to that location where you're looking. Another spot in the Family Search website where you can find some of these digitized directories, if you go under search and go under books, they've got lots of great digitized resources, including city directories. So for example, I can just type in Chicago city directory or whatever city I'm looking for. And then here we go. Right away, we've got an 1844 one. So there is also different access levels. So some of them are completely publicly accessible. You can look at every single page. Some of them might only give you little excerpts, depending on the different agreements they have with certain areas. Or the original record holders. So I can click on view inside, and then just like I have before, I can kind of go through the different pages, or I can even use the magnifying glass up here and type in that last name that I'm looking for. And then I get to see what page they're on and go to that specific page. And then, oh, here's an ad for, that business I was looking for. Here's the listings that I'm looking for example. And just like the other sites, you can save a copy of it right here. There's also, if you go to search and you go to records, if you go down to this find a collection area, you can also type in directories here. So you can see, oh, here's some German ones for different years. There's that city and business directory area for the United States that I was talking about. Or if I wanted to, I could also go back to this records area and I can put in my ancestor's name here. So again, I can put in some details, like they lived in Appleton, Wisconsin, and search for them. Of course, it's right now, it's going to give me a bunch of other results like census records and stuff like that. But if I go to collection, you can see there's different collection types. So I can look and see, is there one for directories, for example? Well, it looks like there is. So right here, there's that US city and business directories one where I can click on that. And then I want to make sure to apply that collection filter so then it knows to narrow it down to just that specific collection. And then again, we've got those little camera icons that I can then click on and be brought into whatever result it shows for me. This one, it's a little harder to tell what specific year it's showing me because you can see there's multiple different years. So sometimes you might need to look at like the headings up here. Sometimes it'll say what specific year it is, or I might need to go, up towards the front of the book in order to determine what specific year I'm looking at. Because for some reason they just mashed all of these directories together. So those are the different ways you can find them in Family Search. Any questions about using Family Search? All right, what else we got? Internet Archive, I showed you some examples before from Internet Archive. This is a really great site where you can look for a lot more digitized resources. There's some specific areas, so there's a metadata area or there's a text contents area. The metadata area is where you're going to search for a specific title or a specific subject, like New York City Directory. If I select text contents, that's where I want to put my ancestor's name. So I want to put, Jacob Still. That's the person I'm looking for, and not necessarily, the name of a title or something. I always also use those quotation marks around a specific name or a specific phrase to search that specific thing. So I'll show you an example here. When I click on search, that's where I see that metadata or text contents option. There's a couple other options, but these are just the two that I recommend using. So again, if I search New York City Directory, in that metadata one, it's going to give me books. Well, we've got New York City Directory for 1845, for example, right here. And now I can click on it and search within it, or browse page by page. It's just like I would a physical book. You can also search for specific names in here. So you might be tempted to search within this search box. That's going to bring you out to the rest of the site and search the whole entire site. You want to click on this magnifying glass over here on the left. That's where you're going to put that name of that person that you're looking for. And then again, you can see it's on page blah, blah, blah. And now I can see there's that name. I can zoom in and see, oh, this again is that name's too late for insertion and removal. So again, you always want to be sure to check those pages of the directory. You can also save these. So if you scroll down, there's a couple different download options. I usually look for like a PDF. That's usually a pretty easy one to download and that most computers can download and be able to easily open it. If we go back out to that Internet Archive, again, if I click on text contents, that's where I'm going to want to put in a specific name of a person. And then I can see this name is in all of these different books, including like they've got newspapers in here sometimes. You can narrow down by specific years, specific media types, specific subjects, for example, different collections that they have. So all kinds of little fun things that you can narrow down over here, unless you want to look through all the different results that they have. Any questions on using Internet Archive? Someone says she doesn't live in Wisconsin either, but her local library does have Heritage Quest available to access for free. So yes, check with your local library, see if they have it available and whether you can use it from home. Heritage Quest is not the same as MyHeritage. That's a great point to make. They're two different companies. All right. A couple other resources. So Library of Congress has a great telephone books collection as well. So you can search through all these different collections. Again, just like I did before with those Sanborn maps, you can narrow it down by a specific state and then look further and further and further until you find that thing. You can narrow it down by date. And then once you go there, you can look, they've either got PDFs of it, which sometimes they take a long time to download if it's a really large directory like that. And then you can, again, just look at it like you would a regular book. And you can download a copy of it too. So again, you can just kind of scroll through and see what they've got in this directory. This is a telephone book, so that's how you do that. The Library of Congress, also, if you search for city directories, I want you to be sure to select everything and type in that specific search. So when you come up to this site, make sure this says everything and not just like digital resources or something. You want it to say everything. And then you're going to search for your specific thing. So say Nashville City Directory. Taking its time today. There we go. So for example, here's one from 1865, and then I can click on it, go into it, and look at all the different pages there are. And see the fun little, illustrations and things that they have in here, the fun little advertisements, all kinds of other things they have. Fold 3, we have the library edition, free from home with your library card. It does have to be an Appleton specific library card, or if you don't have an Appleton card, you live in a different area, check with your local library for access. Again, for those who live in Appleton, you can use it from home. Come to our genealogy area, go to fold 3. This is more a military specific website, but they do have some non-military specific records. So if you scroll down to where it says non-military, you can dive into some of those resources. I go under publications, and then you can type in directory. And now I can see, oh, there's some Kansas City ones, there's some Minneapolis ones, Pittsburgh, Toledo, et cetera, et cetera. And I can see all these different years and different locations. And then again, click in on it. I can do a search, or I can browse in these specific years and then be brought into those areas to look at this specific directory and that specific page. And I can save it under actions. I can download a copy right there. So just another great resource that you can use. Google Books also has some great digitized content as well, searching by that subject or that title. So again, looking for something like New York City Directory. If you want a specific year, you can also put in a specific year, but if you're just looking for all the resources for that specific thing, just type in that, and then again, you can be brought into that. And now you can look through this, or you can search a specific name in here. So now it will bring me to those specific pages where I can find that specific name and see it right there. Sometimes it lets you download the whole book in a PDF form. So it kind of depends, again, on copyright and all that. So that's another resource for you. The Digital Public Library of America also has some great digitized resources. So again, you want to search for that specific title, specific subjects, and it will take you to other digital libraries. So this is basically like a large collection of, oh, they must be having problems with their site too. Oh, maybe not. Hold on. Let's see if we can get it to work here. Or maybe it's my internet. So you can see here it's linking me to the University of Wisconsin's digital collection. So Digital Public Library of America is not the one who digitized it, but they're linking you to this resource that you can now find it somewhere else. And then it brings you into that resource. So that's another spot where you can check. HathiTrust is another great digital library. Again, search for that subject, that title area. It might give you only limited access unless you sign in with a partner institution. So usually like college students have a login to this site to use it. But this is, again, a spot where you can, search for a specific location and the word city directory or whatever you're looking for and find what there is. There's a lot of free stuff just for us regular folks. So you can see as long as it says full view, you can click into it and be able to browse that resource. And just like the other things, you can search within the text of it and search a specific name. I can also go page by page here and just kind of scroll through like I would a regular book. But once my search comes up, you can click on a specific page and then it will highlight on that page where that name appears. So again, a really easy way for you to find some more resources and to search within without having to go to the library to find it. There's a site called Online Historical Directories. It's not complete, but they do have some great US and international collections. So you can see some Canadian ones, for example. Just kind of keep clicking. It's kind of like a little accordion where you have to kind of keep clicking until you get to the links. And then it will show you, okay, here's one for Victoria in this specific year. Oh, that link is dead, unfortunately. So you just have to maybe go to the next one and see if that one works. So sometimes, these sites aren't always updated, so you might unfortunately get a page not found link. So it's worth a shot to see if you can find something. It also links you to some of those paid resources. So this is linking me to Ancestry, for example, that I'd have to have a paid subscription in order to search in this one at this time. As someone mentioned in the chat earlier as well, the Ancestor Hunt. This one's a great site. They've got some resources by state. So if I go here to resources, they've got all these different things like newspapers and cemetery records and church records, all kinds of things. There's a category of directories. This is a free site, but it does have kind of a few ads that kind of pop up, so you just kind of have to navigate around those. Once you get to that directories section, if you scroll down, they've got state-by-state resources. So if I know I'm looking for California, I would click on the California one, and then it's going to bring me to all the different links for all the California ones that they know of that are online. So again, I've got to scroll through some of this stuff. They've got some statewide resources, and then they're going to break it down by specific counties as well. So again, I'd click on whatever I'm looking for, and it might show me something like this. And, maybe I have to click on the specific pages to be brought into that actual image of it. But again, another great resource to list some of the locations online where you can find this stuff. Two other subscription required ones are MyHeritage and Find My Past, which you'd have to have an individual subscription in order to access those, but they do have directories on there as well. A lot of international ones. A couple more search tips to wrap up. If you're searching online, I always try also to just search with the surname, unless it's a super common name like Johnson or Smith, because a lot of these people are listed last name, comma, first name. So you can see the Hamiltons, there's lots of different Hamiltons here. And some of these only list their first name here once I get to that page. So you want to be careful with sometimes searching, it might not always catch that. Or go into a specific city, go into a specific year and go page by page, find those H's and then go alphabetically like you would look at a physical book. Again, first names might be abbreviated. So like we've got Richard here is R-I-C-H-D. If I spell out in my search term Richard fully, it might not pick up this hit of it because it's abbreviated. And the indexing in these isn't always 100% the greatest either. And again, we've got misspellings of certain names as well. So you want to try a couple different ways. Again, if you don't get any results or you're having trouble finding relevant stuff, go into that actual directory, page through, put a number in, see how close you are, see the table of contents, know where alphabetically those listings start. Sometimes you'll also see that page number in Ancestry, that page number in Family Search. It doesn't always match with the page number of the book because they're scanning two pages at once. So page 50 of the directory is actually, page 25 in the online scans because they're scanning those two pages at once. If you can't find your ancestors in directories, there are a couple alternatives. Tax list. There are some tax lists on Ancestry and on Family Search because these are resources that are usually done every year. Your ancestor, of course, had to pay taxes, but they also have a lot more collections offline. So, for example, locally here at the UW Green Bay Archives, they've got some tax lists for Outagamie County, as well as the History Museum at the Castle here in Appleton. They both have certain years for Outagamie County. There's also voter records. So if you happen to attend our Find Your Ancestor session a couple weeks ago with Pam Vestal, she talked all about voter records and how great they are, like voter registration records. You can find some of those online on some of the various resources. Or again, offline, those county courthouses, those state archives, those genealogy and historical societies, or they may be buried somewhere in the county court books and might not be indexed. Again, I also look at the Family Search Wiki for voting records sections in those specific areas. So, for example, if we pull up the Family Search Wiki, we can put in something like South Carolina voting records, and it's going to talk to me about what resources are available online, maybe give me a little history or what I can find in these records, how to find these records. Again, each state's going to be different on how they handle it and what might be online versus offline. But this is a great way to find out a little bit more. Of course, those state and federal censuses, we talked about the census a couple months ago, how there's different state ones, different federal ones, the various years there are. I always start with the Family Search Wiki on that, or of course, refer back to our census talk that we had a couple months ago. Again, those federal ones are done every 10 years, beginning in 1790 to current, but we can only access up to 1950 for genealogists, and that 1891 was mostly destroyed by fire. We've got that recording on the census talk on YouTube. If you've missed that, lots of great tips in there. Newspapers, we also did our big newspaper talk in two different parts. As more and more get digitized, they can help you pinpoint your ancestor for that specific time, that specific place, give you more of those context clues on their life. Sometimes it even lists their address in specific articles. So that's another way to find out where your ancestor is living and a little bit more about them. That's what I've got for you. We're going to wrap up the year next month on Tuesday, December 16th. We're going to talk all about religious records, what records there are, how to find out what church they might have attended, how to get access to those records. In the meantime, we've got our last Find Your Ancestor session of the year on December 13th at 2 p.m. We're going to host Sherry Hudson Passy to talk about how to plan your work and work your plan, which is the key to making sure you're doing thorough research in your genealogy. So hopefully you'll join us for those. Happy to take any additional questions you might have, and thank you for attending.
Andy, what was the very first Appleton City Directory you here?
The first Appleton City Directory we have is 1873.
That is the first one ever published.
That I'm aware of, yes. Did rural areas have directories? So yeah, I mentioned this earlier. The rural areas sometimes were included in county directories. So like for us in Outagamie County, some of our rural communities are featured in those county directories. So that's a good spot to check. Sometimes, depending on the community, they might have also been featured in a neighboring city directory as well. Any other questions for you online folks? All right, everyone. Thank you so much again for attending. Hope to see you in December. Take care.